My sister threw away my grandma's music box and all my childhood keepsakes while I was out, calling it decluttering. When I asked where they were, she smiled and said, "You're welcome. You'll thank me one day for helping you let go." I just stared at her. That was 6 months ago. Last week, she was sitting in a courtroom, red-faced and silent. My sister threw away my irreplaceable childhood keepsakes while I was gone, calling it decluttering. So I decluttered her designer wardrobe straight to charity. I have always been pretty sentimental. I keep a small trunk in my bedroom filled with things from my childhood. My first ballet slippers, drawings I made when I was 5, birthday cards from relatives who have since passed away, my high school yearbooks, and a small music box my grandmother gave me before she died. None of it is worth much money, but emotionally, it's priceless. I live with my sister Katie because rent in our city is ridiculous. We split everything evenly and have our own rooms. She knows how important that trunk is to me. It's not hidden. It sits in the corner of my room, and I've even told her multiple times, "That's my most important possession. Please never touch it." She's always rolled her eyes saying, "You're such a hoarder. One day you'll thank me for helping you declutter." Katie is the complete opposite of me. She's extremely minimalistic to the point of being judgmental about other people's belongings. She's constantly nagging me to get rid of junk, even though my space is clean and organized. The thing is, she also has an overflowing walk-in closet full of clothes, many of which she's never worn. But that apparently is fine because fashion is an investment. 2 weeks ago, I went away for a long weekend with my boyfriend. When I got back, I immediately noticed my trunk was missing. I panicked and asked Katie where it was. She casually said, "Oh, I finally helped you get rid of that old garbage. You're welcome." I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She had actually gone into my room while I was gone, opened my trunk, and thrown away everything in it. She said she saved me from being emotionally chained to useless crap, and that I should be grateful she took the first step for me. I was shaking. I asked her where she threw it away, and she said the garbage truck had already come that morning. All of it. My grandma's music box, my yearbooks, my childhood letters, gone forever. I started crying and told her she had no right to go through my stuff. She rolled her eyes and accused me of overreacting and playing the victim. For the next 2 days, she acted like nothing happened. No apology, no remorse. Every time I brought it up, she gaslit me saying, "You'll feel lighter without all that baggage," or, "You know I did you a favor." That's when I decided I was done letting her walk over me. I waited until she went to work the following week. I took 3 big garbage bags and went straight into her room. I didn't touch her sentimental items, she didn't have any, but I went for her precious clothes. I bagged up about 80% of them. Designer dresses, expensive jeans, jackets, shoes, everything. Then I drove straight to a local charity drop-off point and donated them. When she came home and saw her empty closet, she lost it. She started screaming at me, demanding to know where her clothes were. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You're welcome. I saved you from being emotionally chained to useless fabric. You should be grateful I took the first step for you." Her face turned bright red. She called me every name in the book and accused me of being spiteful and vindictive. I reminded her that she had thrown away things I could never replace, and at least her clothes could go to someone in need. I told her this was the only way she would understand the pain she caused me. She ran to our mom about it, and our mom took her side, saying, "Clothes can be expensive. You went too far." When I reminded her of the sentimental value of the things Katie threw away, Mom shrugged and said, "You can't live in the past." Now Katie has been telling all our relatives and friends that I destroyed her wardrobe out of nowhere. Of course, she conveniently leaves out the part where she destroyed my keepsakes first. A few of my friends think I escalated things too much, but others say she deserved it. The thing is, I didn't even take all her clothes. I left her work uniforms and some basics so she wasn't completely stranded. She still has shoes, a few jeans, and shirts, but the designer stuff she loved so much, gone to charity. Katie is now giving me the silent treatment, which honestly is a blessing, but our living arrangement is tense. I'm already looking for my own place because I can't trust her not to do something else behind my back. I know I went nuclear, but in my mind, this was the only way she'd understand that my belongings matter, even if they aren't expensive. She violated my privacy, disrespected my boundaries, and destroyed things I'll never get back, and expected me to thank her for it. Just when I thought she couldn't retaliate any further, I came home yesterday to find my laptop, textbooks, and half my dishes gone. The empty desk looked wrong without my laptop sitting there. My hands shook as I walked to the kitchen and saw half the cabinet shelves bare where my plates and bowls used to be. The bookshelf had gaps like missing teeth where my textbooks had been lined up for my online classes. I grabbed my phone and texted Ryan about what Katie had done now. He texted back that he was coming over right away. I started making a list on my phone of everything missing while walking through the apartment. My work laptop with all my design files was gone. 3 expensive textbooks for my marketing course were missing. Half my dishes, including the nice set my aunt gave me for my birthday. Even my coffee maker had disappeared from the counter. Ryan showed up within an hour and his face got redder as he looked at each empty spot. He said this was theft and I needed to file a police report. I knew that would make everything worse, but maybe he was right about Katie crossing into criminal territory. We were taking photos of the empty spaces when Katie walked in carrying takeout. She looked at us and said we were even now. Ryan stepped toward her and told her I needed those things for my job. Katie just shrugged and said I had sabotaged her life first. I wanted to scream at her, but instead I walked to my room and called Soren, our building manager. He sighed when I explained what was happening between Katie and me. He said he'd gotten 3 noise complaints this week about our unit. If this continued, we were both facing eviction and needed to resolve this or find separate housing immediately. My stomach dropped because I couldn't afford to move right now. That night, I lay in bed doing math in my head. A new laptop would cost at least $1,200. The textbooks were another $400. Finding a new apartment meant first month, last month, and security deposit. Breaking our current lease would cost another month's rent as penalty. My savings would be completely wiped out. Through the wall, I could hear Katie on the phone phone telling someone about her psycho sister who destroyed her wardrobe. She was loud enough that I knew she wanted me to hear every word. The next morning, I borrowed Ryan's laptop and went to a coffee shop to work. I had a design deadline that couldn't wait. My supervisor emailed asking why I missed the morning video call. I typed back that I was having technical difficulties because I was too embarrassed to explain the real situation. Around noon, Mom called while I was trying to focus on work. She'd heard Katie's version of events and immediately started in about how I'd started this by touching her things. I tried to explain about my irreplaceable keepsakes, but she cut me off. She said I was being dramatic and Katie's wardrobe was worth thousands of dollars. The favoritism hurt worse than anything Katie had done. After work, I drove to 3 different apartment complexes to check availability. Every single place wanted first month, last month, and security deposit up front. That was nearly $6,000 I didn't have. Without my laptop, I couldn't take on the freelance projects that usually gave me extra income. Katie had created the perfect trap. Ryan met me for dinner and offered to loan me money for a new laptop. I said no, because this was my mess to fix. He held me while I finally broke down crying. It wasn't just about the things, but about losing my sister to this vindictive war we were fighting. On the 3rd day, I was home when our neighbor Sophia knocked on my door. Katie had just left for work. Sophia said she'd heard what was happening and saw Katie taking my things to her car. She pulled out her phone and showed me time-stamped photos of Katie loading my laptop bag and a box of my belongings into her trunk. I stared at those photos on Sophia's phone for a long moment before thanking her and heading straight back inside. Katie was still at work, but would be home in an hour. I printed the photos from my phone and sat at the kitchen table waiting for her. When she walked in carrying takeout, she froze seeing me with the printed evidence spread across the table. I pushed the photos toward her and told her she had 24 hours to return everything, or I'd file a police report. She actually laughed at me and said she'd just tell them about the clothes I stole. I reminded her I donated them while she threw mine in the garbage, and there was a difference. Her face went hard and she told me to try it. The next morning, I called a locksmith while Katie was in the shower. The guy showed up within an hour and changed my bedroom lock in 15 minutes. He saw my red eyes and asked if I was having roommate troubles, and I just nodded. He gave me a discount and 2 extra keys. I heard Katie's key scratching against her door later that afternoon trying to get into my room, but I was already at work. Day 4 started with my phone blowing up while I was using Ryan's borrowed laptop at his place. Katie had discovered the new lock and sent message after message about how it was her apartment too, and she'd call the landlord. I didn't respond and just kept working on the presentation due that week. I wonder what's really going through Katie's mind when she keeps telling everyone her sister is psycho while completely leaving out her own part in starting this whole mess. There's something odd about how she seems totally fine with destroying irreplaceable memories, but acts shocked when her replaceable clothes get donated. Soren, our landlord, called me during lunch saying that technically we both had rights to all spaces, but given the circumstances, he'd allow the lock temporarily. He gave us 30 days to resolve the situation or find new housing arrangements. That night, I ate my microwave dinner alone in my locked room, listening to Katie slam every door and cabinet in the kitchen. The apartment felt like a war zone, and every sound made me jump, waiting for whatever she'd do next. My supervisor, Linda, pulled me aside the next morning at work and mentioned my performance had slipped that week. I made excuses about technical issues that would be resolved soon, but she looked skeptical and reminded me they needed me at 100%. When I got home that evening, Katie had someone with her in the living room. Derek introduced himself as her boyfriend and a lawyer, then cornered me in the kitchen while Katie smirked from the doorway. He said Katie could sue me for the value of her clothes, and if I returned them, this would all go away. I pulled out my phone and started recording, asking if that was legal advice or boyfriend posturing. He backed off immediately. The next day, I went to the library and spent hours researching tenant rights and small claims court procedures. The librarian noticed me printing page after page and quietly brought over some resources about domestic disputes and conflict resolution. Her kindness made me tear up after dealing with my family's betrayal. Ryan picked me up and we drove around looking at studio apartments, but even the cheapest ones would eat up 70% of my income. He suggested I move in with him since we'd been together 8 months, but adding relationship pressure to this chaos felt dangerous, and I told him I needed to think about it. Day 6, I came home to find scratches all around my bedroom door lock, like someone had tried to pick it or pry it open. The metal was scraped and there were tool marks on the wood frame. Katie was watching TV like nothing happened, but I knew she'd crossed another line from theft to attempted breaking and entering. I took photos of everything, then ordered a door camera online with overnight shipping. The camera arrived the next day, but before I could even set it up, Mom showed up at our door without warning, saying she needed to talk to both of us about this whole mess. She sat us down in the living room and started her speech about how we're family and need to work things out. But within 2 minutes, she was looking right at me saying I needed to be the bigger person since I'm older. Behind Mom's back, Katie had this smug little smile that made my stomach turn, because I knew right then that any hope of family support was just a fantasy I needed to let go of. Katie jumped on the moment and announced she wanted me out of the apartment, and she'd cover the rent until she found a new roommate, which Mom actually nodded at and said seemed fair. I stared at both of them, trying to process how destroying my irreplaceable memories and stealing my work equipment somehow made me the bad guy here. But Mom just kept talking about moving forward and letting go of grudges. After Mom left, I got a call from Aunt Rachel, who'd heard the whole story from Mom, but unlike her sister, she actually listened to my side and told me Katie had always been Mom's golden child, and I should document everything and get out as soon as I could because this wasn't going to get better. I spent that weekend at Ryan's place trying to decompress, but couldn't really relax because every text notification made me jump. And sure enough, Katie started sending me photos of herself wearing new designer clothes with captions about rebuilding her collection, which felt like she was twisting the knife on purpose. Monday morning, I went to the police station with all the photos Sophia had taken of my stolen stuff stuff and filed a report, but the officer told me roommate disputes rarely lead to prosecution, and my best option was probably small claims court. I spent the rest of that day at the courthouse research room, trying to figure out how to file the paperwork and what evidence I'd need to prove the value of my stolen items. When Katie got the notice about the police report 2 days later, she completely lost it, and at 2 in the morning she was pounding on my bedroom door screaming about how I was insane for calling the cops over some stupid stuff. I didn't say a word back, but my new door camera was recording every threat she made through the door, which I saved to multiple cloud accounts just in case. The next morning, I overheard Derek leaving Katie a voicemail saying this was too much drama and he was out, which meant her new relationship was over because of all this chaos. She immediately blamed me, of course, and screamed through the apartment that I'd ruined everything, even though she was the one who started this whole war by destroying my memories. I finally accepted Ryan's offer to borrow his old laptop and started taking on small freelance projects again, even though each job only paid $50 or $100, but it was progress toward getting out of this nightmare. Just when I thought things couldn't get pettier, Katie changed the Wi-Fi password while I was in the middle of working on a deadline project, and I had to burn through my entire phone data plan to finish it. When I confronted her about it, she just shrugged and said her name was on the internet bill, so her rules applied now. 2 days later, our landlord Soren showed up after getting multiple noise complaints from neighbors and warned us both that one more complaint would get us both evicted regardless of our lease because we were disrupting the entire building. After that, Katie and I basically became hostile strangers, sharing walls and avoiding each other completely, which was actually better than the constant fighting, but the tension in the apartment was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The next 2 weeks were the worst kind of hell, where we both existed in the same space, but acted like the other person wasn't there. I started showering at Ryan's gym before work and eating all my meals either at the office or in my car, just to avoid being in that apartment. Katie did the same thing, leaving super early and coming back super late, and we'd time our movements like some kind of weird dance where we'd hear each other's door open and wait until the coast was clear. The silence was actually worse than the screaming matches, because at least then we were getting it out instead of this toxic buildup that made my stomach hurt every time I had to go home. Day 16 at work, my coworker Sarah mentioned during lunch that her friend needed a roommate starting next month, cheaper rent and no drama, and I jumped on it immediately. She warned me the girl wanted someone stable without any crazy ex-roommate situations, but I just said everything was fine because I needed out so badly I would have said anything. That evening I was grabbing some clothes from my room when I saw Katie's credit card statement on the kitchen counter and couldn't help but look. She'd already spent over $8,000 replacing her wardrobe with designer stuff that cost way more than what I donated, maxing out 2 cards and opening a third one according to the papers spread out next to her laptop. The spite purchases were destroying her finances, but she didn't care as long as she could post her new Gucci bags on Instagram with captions about upgrading and knowing your worth. 2 days later, I met Jessica at a coffee shop near her apartment, and she seemed completely normal, actually nice even, showing me photos of the place on her phone. The apartment was smaller than what I had now, but it looked peaceful and clean, and most importantly, it would be mine without any toxic roommate making my life hell. She said she just needed someone who paid rent on time and respected boundaries, and I told her that's all I wanted too, feeling relief wash over me for the first time in weeks. When I told Ryan that night about the apartment, he got upset and insisted I should just move in with him instead of wasting money on rent somewhere else. I snapped back that I needed to handle this myself and didn't need him rescuing me like I was some helpless person who couldn't manage my own life. We both cooled off after a few minutes, but there was still this weird tension because he thought I was being stubborn and I thought he was being pushy about something we'd never even discussed before all this drama started. Day 19. I came home to find an envelope taped to my bedroom door, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Katie was actually suing me in small claims court for $5,000 for her clothes, with a court date in 45 days, and I actually laughed at how insane this was. She could put a price on her replaceable designer clothes, but my grandmother's music box and all those irreplaceable memories were apparently worth nothing to her. I spent the next day researching small claims court procedures online and learned I could file a counterclaim for my stolen laptop and other belongings she'd thrown away. My friend Sophia agreed to be my witness since she'd seen my trunk before and knew how important those items were to me. Plus, the charity gave me a receipt showing I'd donated Katie's clothes rather than selling them or destroying them. The research was actually calming because it gave me something concrete to focus on instead of just stewing in anger, and I started putting together a folder with all my evidence, including photos of my trunk from last year and screenshots of Katie's texts where she'd admitted to throwing my stuff away. Mom called that evening to scold me about the lawsuit, asking how I could make Katie go to court over this when family doesn't do that to each other. I finally lost it and asked her where she was when Katie destroyed my grandmother's music box, the one thing I had left from her mother, and Mom just went silent before hanging up on me. Katie's spending $8,000 on revenge shopping while maxing out credit cards is peak cutting off your nose to spite your face energy. Someone should tell her bankruptcy court doesn't care about Instagram likes. 3 days later, I signed the lease for Jessica's apartment with a move-in date 2 weeks out, and the relief was so overwhelming I actually cried in my car afterward. I didn't tell Katie because I wanted her to think she'd won by forcing me out, planning to leave on my own terms without giving her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. Everything seemed to be falling into place until day 22, when I got an email from one of my freelance clients saying they were ending our contract effective immediately. Then another client called an hour later saying the same thing, and that's when the third client forwarded me an email Katie had sent them saying I was unstable and unreliable and going through a mental breakdown that was affecting my work. She'd found my client list on my laptop before she'd thrown it away and was systematically contacting every single one of them with lies about my mental state and work reliability. 2 contracts gone in one morning with 3 more clients texting me asking if everything was okay because they'd gotten concerning emails about me. I spent the rest of that morning calling every client to explain the situation and begging them to ignore Katie's emails. Most understood once I explained, but the damage was done with those 2 contracts. That afternoon, I found a free legal aid clinic downtown and waited 3 hours to see someone. The attorney, a tired woman with stacks of papers on her desk, listened to my story while taking notes. She told me I had a defamation case, but pursuing it would cost thousands I didn't have. She suggested documenting everything and maybe getting a restraining order if Katie kept escalating. The whole system felt rigged against people like me who couldn't afford real lawyers. Over the next few days, I started packing my room in secret while Katie was at work. Each box I taped shut felt like a small victory, a step closer to freedom from this nightmare. I labeled everything with boring names like winter clothes and old books in case she went snooping through my stuff. The process was actually calming, organizing my life into neat boxes ready for a fresh start somewhere safe. On day 24, Katie came home early and spotted empty apartment boxes in our recycling bin. She stormed into my room where I was taping another box and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. She called me a coward for running away after destroying her life. The way she twisted everything to make herself the victim was incredible. Soren, our landlord, stopped by later that week to check on a maintenance issue and pulled me aside in the hallway. He offered to be a reference for my new place and said he was sorry about everything that happened. His kindness almost made me cry right there in the hallway. Complete strangers were showing more compassion than my own family had. The final week in the apartment dragged by with Katie leaving nasty notes everywhere I might find them. On my pillow, taped to the bathroom mirror, stuck to my bedroom door, all with messages about my victim complex and drama queen behavior. I photographed every single one with my phone for potential court evidence later. Ryan came over on moving day to help load boxes into his truck for temporary storage at his place. Katie watched from her bedroom window the whole time, her phone pressed to her ear. Within an hour, Mom was calling to accuse me of stealing furniture that I'd actually bought myself. I told her they were my purchases with my own money, but she didn't care about facts anymore. When I went back inside for the last load, Katie planted herself in the doorway with her arms spread wide. She demanded I return her clothes or pay her before leaving. Soren appeared behind her with another tenant named Sophia and told Katie to move or he'd call the police. She stepped aside, but the look in her eyes promised this wasn't over, not by a long shot. My new room at Jessica's apartment was smaller, but felt like a sanctuary compared to living with Katie. Jessica made me tea and gave me space to decompress without asking too many questions about the situation. That first night in my new place, I slept better than I had in weeks. No footsteps outside my door, no hostile energy seeping through the walls, just blessed peace and quiet. I woke up realizing how much the constant stress had been destroying my health and sanity. The next morning, Katie started texting demands for my new address for what she called legal purposes. I forwarded everything to the legal aid attorney who sent her a formal notice that all communication had to go through him now. She exploded in a barrage of texts I didn't even read, just screenshot and forwarded to my lawyer for documentation. 3 weeks passed with nothing but angry texts from Katie that all went straight to my lawyer until Mom showed up at my workplace during lunch rush. I was helping a customer when I heard her voice getting louder near the entrance, telling everyone who would listen that I was destroying our family, and Katie hadn't been able to eat or sleep for weeks because of what I'd done. My coworkers started staring as she pushed past the receptionist and marched toward my desk, her face red and her hands shaking. Security arrived within minutes, but not before she'd screamed that I was heartless and vindictive in front of half the office, including several important clients who were there for meetings. They escorted her out while she kept yelling about family loyalty and how Katie was falling apart, but the damage was done. My supervisor called me into his office 20 minutes later and closed the door behind us. He sat down and folded his hands on his desk, looking uncomfortable as he explained that while he understood people had personal problems, this couldn't happen at work again, or they'd have to reconsider my position. The threat hung in the air as I nodded and apologized for something that wasn't even my fault. That evening, I made an appointment with a therapist because the stress was eating me alive. The first session was mostly me crying and explaining everything that had happened, from the trunk to the clothes to the escalating war between us. The therapist listened carefully and then told me what I'd been needing to hear, that this was abuse, that family members could be abusive, and that I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. Having a professional validate my feelings helped more than I expected. I spent the next week gathering every piece of evidence for small claims court, organizing Sophia's photos of my empty trunk, the charity receipt showing the donation value, recordings Katie had sent threatening me, and emails she'd sent to my freelance clients claiming I was unstable. My counterclaim included $3,000 in lost income from contracts that got canceled after her interference. 5 days before court, Katie showed up at Ryan's apartment building and waited by the entrance until we came back from dinner. She stepped out from behind a pillar and said we needed to talk without lawyers getting involved. Ryan immediately moved between us and told her to leave or he'd call the police. She backed up but shouted that this wasn't over before getting in her car and speeding off. The court date arrived on a cold Tuesday morning and we both showed up with our evidence folders. The small claims hearing room was smaller than I expected, just a regular office with a judge behind a desk. Katie claimed her designer clothes were worth $8,000, but I had the charity receipt showing they'd valued everything at $3,000. The judge looked through both our evidence piles without much expression on his face. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to stay composed but broke down describing the music box my grandma gave me, the drawings I'd made as a kid, the birthday cards from relatives who were gone now. I explained these things had no money value but couldn't be replaced, ever. Katie rolled her eyes while I was talking and the judge definitely noticed. After reviewing everything, the judge announced his decision in a tired voice. Katie would get $2,000 for the clothes. I would get $1,800 for my laptop and other stolen items, basically canceling each other out. He looked at both both of us and said we were adults who'd acted like children and needed to learn to communicate better. Katie stormed out of the courtroom and slammed the door so hard the bailiff had to follow her. 2 days later, Ryan and I sat on his couch talking about everything that had happened. He told me he was proud of me for standing up for myself, but we agreed to take things slow with our relationship since I needed time to process all this family trauma. That same afternoon, Katie posted on Facebook about winning her case, making it sound like she'd gotten some huge victory and leaving out that she owed me almost the same amount. Several mutual friends messaged me asking for my side of the story, but I didn't respond to any of them because I was too exhausted to keep fighting this battle online. 3 days later, Mom called and demanded we have a family meeting at Aunt Rachel's house on day 50, which was weird since she and Rachel barely talked anymore after some old fight about money. I drove there feeling sick to my stomach, knowing this would be another attack session where Mom would take Katie's side like always. Rachel's house smelled like fresh cookies when I walked in, and she squeezed my shoulder before we all sat down in her living room. Mom started immediately with her prepared speech about how this had gone far enough and we needed to act like adults, but Rachel cut her off mid-sentence. She looked straight at Mom and said Linda had been enabling Katie for years, and my response was actually proportionate to Katie's cruelty. The room went dead silent for about 10 seconds before Katie exploded, jumping up from her chair and screaming at Rachel that she didn't know what I'd put her through. Katie systematically destroying her sister's freelance career by emailing clients makes me wonder what kind of person has that much time and energy for revenge. The way she tracked down every single client from that thrown-away laptop shows a level of planning that's honestly fascinating in its pettiness. Rachel stayed completely calm and reminded everyone that Katie threw away my dead grandmother's music box, and there was no justification for that. Mom tried to change the subject to the money aspect, but Rachel wouldn't let her, pointing out that sentimental items couldn't be replaced with money like designer clothes could. Katie's face turned bright red and she started crying those fake tears she always used to manipulate people, but Rachel wasn't buying it. The meeting ended with Katie storming out and slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall, and Mom running after her without even saying goodbye. Rachel hugged me tight and told me I was welcome at her house anytime, and that not everyone in the family was blind to what was really happening. It was a small comfort, but I held on to it like a life raft. By day 55, I was slowly rebuilding my client base, sending emails explaining I'd had technical difficulties that were now resolved. Most clients were understanding, and some even offered me rush projects to help me catch up financially. One client who ran a marketing firm offered me a larger project than usual, saying everyone has rough patches and my work quality spoke for itself. I was starting to feel like maybe I could recover from this mess when Jessica called me panicking because Katie had shown up at her apartment building. Jessica didn't let her pass the lobby, telling her firmly that I didn't live there while Katie screamed and pounded on the glass doors. The neighbors started coming out to see what was happening and someone threatened to call the police if Katie didn't leave. Jessica was shaken when she called me afterward, saying my sister seemed completely unhinged and she was worried about what Katie might do next. That's when I decided to file for a restraining order based on Katie's continued harassment and the apartment incident. The legal aid attorney I found was willing to help pro bono after hearing my story, and he filed the paperwork that same day. He told me we'd have a family court date in 3 weeks, and to keep documenting everything Katie did. The paper trail was getting thicker every day with screenshots of her social media posts, texts from family members about her behavior, and now witness statements from Jessica's neighbors. On day 60, I had my first therapy session with someone who specialized in family trauma, and she helped me understand the dynamics I'd been living with my whole life. She explained that Katie had always been the golden child while I was the family scapegoat, and by fighting back, I'd broken the pattern they all expected me to follow. That's why they were so angry, because I wasn't playing my assigned role anymore. It made so much sense that I actually cried in her office, finally understanding why nothing I did was ever good enough for Mom. An old friend from high school reached out on Facebook after hearing about the situation through mutual friends. She told me Katie had tried to turn her against me, but her story had too many holes and contradictions to be believable. She apologized for not reaching out sooner and said she was sorry I was going through this. Slowly, the truth was spreading despite Katie's smear campaign, and people were starting to see through her lies. On day 65, Mom sent me a text that made my hands shake with anger. She said she was writing me out of her will unless I apologized to Katie and paid her back for the clothes. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back that she could keep her money because I'd rather have peace than any inheritance. She called immediately, crying and saying I was breaking her heart, but I didn't answer. I was done being manipulated with tears and guilt trips. The next morning, Sophia, one of Katie's former friends, texted me that Katie had received an eviction notice from our old apartment. She couldn't afford the rent alone and had maxed out all her credit cards trying to maintain her lifestyle without my half of the expenses. Sophia added that karma works slowly but thoroughly, with a little smiling emoji at the end. 3 days passed, and I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my chest whenever I thought about Katie losing her apartment. I made an appointment with my therapist and sat in her office picking at the tissue box while explaining everything. She looked at me with understanding eyes and said I could grieve the relationship I wished we had while still protecting myself from who she actually was. That helped a little, but the sadness stuck around like a bruise that wouldn't heal. I was making coffee the next morning when my phone rang with an unknown number, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Katie calling from jail, and my stomach dropped as she rushed through explaining she'd been arrested for smashing my car windows in Ryan's parking garage. The security cameras caught everything, and Ryan was pushing me to press charges while Katie begged me not to through the scratchy jail phone connection. I hung up and called my lawyer, who said this was actually perfect timing for our restraining order case since it showed a pattern of harassment. I decided not to press charges, but told my attorney to use the arrest report as evidence, which he said would basically guarantee we'd win the hearing. The guilt ate at me me for 2 days until Jessica came over with wine, and we sat on my couch while she told me about cutting off her own toxic mother 5 years ago. She said the family you choose is always better than the one you're born into, and we toasted to building new support systems. The restraining order hearing came faster than I expected, and I walked into the courtroom to see Katie sitting with Mom and some lawyer in a cheap suit. My attorney laid out all the evidence, including the harassment texts, the vandalism arrest report, and screenshots of her defaming me online to anyone who would listen. Katie's lawyer tried to make me look like the bad guy, but the judge wasn't buying it when faced with actual police reports and security footage. The judge granted a 1-year restraining order requiring Katie to stay 500 feet away and stop all contact immediately. Mom started crying in the courtroom while Katie just stared at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes, but I felt relief washing over me. Work got so much better without the constant stress, and my supervisor pulled me aside to say I seemed like my old self again. She mentioned being glad whatever was happening had been resolved, and my professional reputation started slowly recovering from Katie's smear campaign. My aunt called and invited me to dinner at her place, where she told me she was proud of me for finally standing up to Katie and Mom. She pulled out a box of old photos, including ones of Grandma, that made my chest tight thinking about the music box Katie had thrown away. 5 days later, my cousin Mark called saying Mom had asked him to pass along messages from Katie about wanting to reconcile and apologize. I documented the call and sent it to my lawyer, who immediately fired off a cease and desist letter warning about violating the restraining order through third parties. The flying monkeys Mom had recruited all scattered when they realized there could be legal consequences for helping her harass me. My aunt texted me that Katie had moved back in with Mom after the eviction, and they were constantly fighting about money and space. She said Katie was learning that Mom's support had limits when she was the one who had to pay all the bills and buy the groceries. The natural consequences were teaching Katie lessons that years of arguments never could have gotten through her thick skull. 3 months passed before the nightmares started hitting me hard. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, dreaming that I'd forgiven Katie and moved back in with her, only to watch her destroy everything I owned all over again while laughing at me. My therapist nodded when I told her about the dreams and the way I kept checking my apartment door locks 5 times before bed. She said trauma responses take time to heal, and that my hypervigilance was normal since safety takes time to believe. 6 months after Katie first threw away my keepsakes, I was finally in a better place with my new apartment downtown, stable work at the marketing firm, Ryan being supportive every step of the way, and the friends who stuck by me becoming my chosen family. The price had been high with Mom and Katie both cut out of my life completely, but the peace I felt every morning waking up in my own safe space was priceless. That peace shattered when a certified letter arrived from Katie's lawyer offering to reconcile if I paid her $3,000 for emotional damages caused by donating her designer wardrobe. My lawyer actually laughed out loud when I forwarded it to him, saying she was obviously desperate and broke and to just ignore it completely. I did ignore it, but the sheer audacity of her demanding money from me after everything she'd done still made my blood boil for days. Mom wasn't giving up either, because Aunt Rachel called me on day 120 to tell me Mom had been begging her to convince me to forgive Katie, claiming she'd learned her lesson and was truly sorry now. Rachel told Mom that facing consequences wasn't the same as learning a lesson, and asked if Katie had actually apologized or just wanted her old life back, which made Mom hang up on her too. I decided to create a small memorial for all the things I'd lost by printing out the few photos I had of some items and writing down every memory I could remember about Grandma's music box and my other keepsakes. Ryan helped me frame Grandma's picture and set up a little shelf in my bedroom where I could honor what was gone, and while it wasn't the same as having the actual items, it helped me find some closure. Everything exploded again on day 150 when my friend Sophia forwarded me a screenshot of Katie's Facebook post where she was claiming I had stolen from her and that she was the victim of sibling abuse who'd lost everything. Rachel dropping truth bombs like she's running for president while Katie pulls out those fake tears that probably worked better in middle school. Poor Mom stuck between her daughters like a referee at a boxing match nobody asked for. The comments section was brutal, with some people attacking me based on her lies, but I was surprised to see several people who knew us both defending me and calling out her pattern of manipulation. I spent hours typing and deleting responses to post on my own social media, but finally decided that silence was more powerful since my real friends already knew the truth and Katie's narrative was crumbling on its own as more people learned what really happened. Truth doesn't need constant defending when the lies are that obvious. Mom made one last desperate attempt at forced reconciliation on day 158 by showing up at my workplace with Katie sitting in the car outside, trying to ambush me into a meeting. Security wouldn't let them pass the lobby after I called down to warn them, but my boss pulled me aside later and told me to handle my family drama or find another job because he was tired of the disruptions. The ultimatum was crystal clear, and I knew I had to take final action. On day 165, I had my lawyer send Mom a formal cease and desist letter stating that I was done, that no contact meant no contact, and if she didn't respect my boundaries, she would face legal consequences, including a restraining order. Writing that letter essentially meant orphaning myself from my birth family, and my hands shook as I signed it, but I knew it was necessary for my mental health and safety. Katie's life completely imploded after that, with Aunt Rachel telling me she'd been fired from her job for missing too many shifts due to depression from the situation, couldn't get approved for any apartments because of the eviction on her record, and even Mom's patience had finally snapped when Katie expected her to pay for everything. They were barely speaking to each other now, fighting constantly about money and space and whose fault everything was, with Mom finally understanding what it felt like to have Katie disrespect her boundaries and belongings every single day. 6 months passed with me going to therapy twice a week at first, then once a week, then every 2 weeks. My therapist had me doing exercises and homework between sessions, writing in journals and practicing boundary setting with strangers at coffee shops. The day I graduated from therapy, she handed me a little certificate she'd made herself herself and told me I'd done the work and broken the cycle. I still had bad days where I'd wake up crying about Grandma's music box, but they got fewer and fewer. Around day 180, the restraining order was about to expire, and a mutual friend from high school texted me that Katie wanted to say something. The message was just 2 words through this friend. I'm sorry. No details about what she was sorry for, no acknowledgement of throwing away my stuff, no real accountability. I deleted the text without responding because some bridges need to stay burned. When my birthday came around, Mom sent a card with a $100 bill inside, probably thinking money would fix things. I took it straight to a women's shelter that helps abuse victims and made the donation in her name. Aunt called me later saying Mom had cried when she found out from the thank you letter the shelter sent her, finally understanding she'd really lost me. Ryan had been staying over more and more, and one night while we were cooking dinner together, he asked if I wanted to find a place together, not because I needed rescuing, but because we were ready as partners. We found a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town where neither Katie nor Mom knew the address. Jessica from work became one of my closest friends, and after a few months she admitted she'd known about me from a local news story that had gone viral with the headline, "Sisters Destroy Each Other's Belongings in Escalating Feud." She said she wanted to give me a chance anyway because everyone deserves fresh starts. I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter on weekends, telling my story to other women and explaining that family abuse is real and they weren't crazy or overreacting. Helping them helped me heal more than any therapy session. When the 1-year anniversary came, it passed quietly with me at my new apartment and Katie still living with Mom according to Aunt. We existed in the same city but completely different worlds now, and the war was over because I'd stopped fighting. Aunt remained my only family connection, meeting me for coffee once a month and telling me Katie had started therapy, but it was too late for us to ever have a relationship again. She said some relationships can't be repaired, only released, and I agreed completely. Then last week a package arrived with no return address, and inside was a music box that looked similar to Grandma's with a note that just said, "I'm sorry, K," in Katie's handwriting. It wasn't the same and could never replace what she destroyed, but I kept it as closure, not forgiveness. I wound it up once to hear the melody, which was different from Grandma's but still pretty, then packed it away in a closet box. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade, but they don't have to define who we are. I chose peace over revenge, distance over drama, and that's the only victory that really matters. My life is smaller now without my birth family, but it's also so much more peaceful. I built something new from the ashes of what Katie burned, and that's enough. Well, folks, that's all from me today. Thanks for letting me wonder about things right alongside you. Definitely been quite the journey together. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.